So it's wonderful to be with you in wherever you are. We are in England at the moment, though I live in France. We are teaching at Gaia House. And so today, the way it's going to work is that I will talk for 15 minutes, then Bernat will talk, then we will have a meditation, then we'll have a discussion, then we'll have a break. We will have a break, and then again, talk, and then some discussion, and then we'll finish with a meditation. So, in a way, the first part, what I like to look in terms of what I want to share with you. So the title is Secular Dharma. And here, now I would like to look at what does it mean in a way, secular meditation, secular Buddhist meditation. And what do we mean by secular? What we mean by secular actually is just to mean saeculum, so that it is for this time. Because in a way, the Buddha was 2,500 years ago, and then through in different country, different time, then Buddhism meditation has come to us. And of course, both of us, Bernat and myself, are very interested in the early Pali text. What are they saying? And then in a way, what are they saying to us today? And at the same time, personally, I think in terms of secular Dharma, I think we are in a very different situation than 2,500 years ago, because in a way, even over time, in China, even in Korea, even in Tibet, in different countries, Japan, etc., generally, Buddhist meditation was circumscribed by geography. And only few people really kind of traveled and were pilgrim. And then a lot of them stayed where they are and studied and practiced what was around them. Personally, I feel nowadays in this saeculum, we actually have so many different meditation techniques. We can encounter so many different Buddhism. And within that, you have so many different aspects that I think it's very specific to this saeculum. And then one wonders in a way, what is it I should do? A bit like in the Kalama Sutta, the people saying to the Buddha, all these teacher comes and tell us to do this or that, and which should we follow? Or should we follow your teaching? And in a way, the Buddha says, oh, you follow the teaching, which will bring more wisdom and compassion. And you don't follow the teaching, which will make you to cause more harm. And so, in a way, what interested in me in terms of my background, because I was a Son nun in Korea for 10 years, so it's more like Zen Chan. And then I practiced mindfulness and insight and vipassana in England. And what I was struck was that, in a way, the theology is a bit different between Son and vipassana. It's kind of a little different. But then I heard about samatha and vipassana, anchoring, concentrating, focusing, experiential inquiry, kind of looking deeply. And to me, he sounded just like my teacher, because my teacher, every time he gave a talk during a long retreat, which we had of 3 months, he would say, song, song, jok, jok, bright, bright, calm, calm. When you practice, you need to cultivate brightness and calmness equally. And then I realized, oh, he's talking about samatha vipassana. And then I kind of thought, but each tradition, each technique seem to have these two common elements in terms of the meditation. So you have a bit of anchoring, focusing, concentration, and you have exploration, looking deeply, questioning. But then you might have different objects you focus on, and you also might have a different way you're going to explore. And what then I became interested in to see that, yeah, the technique comes actually after the samatha vipassana. And then it became interesting for me in terms of the saeculum and what we're doing here. I thought, how does it work, this samatha and this vipassana? Because the more I practiced, and in my tradition in Korea, they never, in those days, in the 70s, 80s, they never talked about mindfulness. Really, they did not talk about mindfulness at all. But what was interesting to me is that after 6 months of just questioning in their technique, what is this, what is this, what is this? I became very aware. So then I became curious. How does it work? And then I realized that in a way you can cultivate mindfulness directly or indirectly. You can cultivate compassion directly or indirectly. And then how does it work? I would say the way it works, or it seems to me, in my experience, is that with the anchoring, you are actually doing 4 things. 4 things happen when you come back to the breath, when you come back to the sound, when you come back to the body, when you come back to loving kindness, when you come back to open awareness, when you come back to question what is this, you're still doing 4 things. First thing is that you don't feed the distraction. Because if you're not on the breath, you're generally distracted. And what are you distracted by? Generally, repetitive thought you have had before. So now I see the practice of samatha as really about not feeding the habit, the pattern of thinking, as dissolving its power and at bringing it back to its creative functioning of thinking, imagining, pondering, whatever it might be. And the 4th thing that happened is that you come back to the whole experience instead of being locked in just one thought or whatever it might be that has taken you away. And so, of course, this, as is pointed out in the text, the samatha, in whatever way you do it actually, is going to lead to calm. And then the looking deeply, which you can do looking into impermanence, or you can do, in a way, the technique I used was to ask a question, what is this, what is this? Leads actually to a similar place of becoming aware of impermanence. And through becoming aware of impermanence, actually, wise compassion arising. So I really see the insight, the vipassana, the looking deeply as a mean to not only have clarity, but also in a way experience a compassion which will change our behavior. And it seems to me that when these 2 things come together, then we're actually developing what I would call a creative awareness, a creative mindfulness. And I would say that creative awareness, mindfulness, then has 2 aspects. One aspect of acceptance, that actually we see, oh, this is the way things have arisen. And in a way, I have to accept mindfully what's going on. And at the same time, at times there is transformation, which means we need to do something. And so it seems to me that when we cultivate this samatha, the vipassana, in whatever way we do it, it actually removes the obstacle to our creative potential. And so then what arises is something which will respond. We will respond to the situation. And so for quite some time, I have this idea of creative awareness, creative mindfulness, creative engagement. And then I wanted to check with one of the great scholars who at time to time asked, can I do this, can I do that? So I asked him, can I translate samasati as creative awareness. And he said, it's not in the text. So I thought, okay, I cannot do that. But as a secular Buddhist, I thought I can still use it because I really felt what we were developing was not just this bare awareness. I really feel that in a way, when we practice meditation, we actually cultivating a creative awareness, that actually an awareness that helps us to see things anew, and more than that, to respond to the situation at hand with wisdom and compassion. And so nowadays, I would say creative awareness. But nowadays, I would actually, now I'm starting to translate Sama. I presume you know the term Sama, generally translated for the Eightfold Path, Samasati, generally right mindfulness, then appropriate mindfulness or skillful mindfulness. Personally, I would rather, actually nowadays, I prefer kind of to call it a caring and careful mindfulness. I'm kind of starting to translate or kind of expand the meaning of sama as caring and careful. So it's caring and careful action, caring and careful effort, caring and careful samadhi, caring and careful mindfulness. And it seems to me that in terms of secular Dharma, for our time, each of us, in a way, has to make sense of how do I experience this? How do I understand this? And sometimes we, in a way, create a language which might not be totally exact to the text, but might, in a way, speak better to us, or possibly speak better to our audience. So that's what I wanted to share today from my side. And now Bernat is going to present his own take.
Thanks, Martine. So another way that we can understand this secular in the secular Dharma is secular as meaning this world, our condition here. So we talk about the secular state, the temporal state. So secular means these worlds. And how does Buddhism explain these worlds, our existential condition in this world? Is with what is usually known as the three characteristics. You may have come across this term, the three characteristics, usually translated something like impermanence, suffering, and not self. If I had to just explain these without using Buddhist jargon, I would say that it's trying to describe not existence. Sometimes it's called the three characteristics of existence. I find that too metaphysical. It's describing our experience. And if it means existence, it means our existential condition, what our life is, what this world is. And I would say that it's saying that we live in a changing, unstable, unpredictable world. That's what life is. It's a changing, unstable, unpredictable place in which we depend and are vulnerable to circumstances, lots of them outside of our control. And we are not the mini gods of our mini worlds. We don't write the script. We cannot decide how things go. So the first of these characteristics is fairly self-evident. Change, impermanence. Things change, things are unstable, therefore they're unreliable in some sense, and they're finite. And we are finite. But the second one is much more interesting, because I would say impermanent is an observable fact. But then the second one, dukkha, really depends on how we understand it and how we translate it. And to me, is quite crucial to our understanding of the Dharma, this term. It's often translated suffering, which is many times a good translation, but sometimes it doesn't work. Because dukkha in Pali is sometimes a noun, sometimes an adjective. And in the famous First Noble Truth, it's an adjective. It doesn't say that birth is suffering, whatever that means. It says that birth is painful, aging is painful, sickness is painful, death is painful, being separated from what we like is painful, being associated with what we dislike is painful. It's an adjective. And I can quite relate to the slogan in a way, life is painful. It's even more than life is suffering. I don't know why. And we know it doesn't mean that it's painful all the time, but that it contains pain and tragedy that's part of life, precisely because it's changing and unstable. That opens us up to hurt, physical or emotional. But when we go to the psychological, that's where I think the translation unsatisfactory comes, which is very, very popular nowadays. And I sort of have a mental project in my mind to really trace where this interpretation comes from, because I don't really know any Pali term that would literally translate as unsatisfactory. It's a very modern idea. Um, I know the word contentment in Pali is completely different, has no connection linguistically to the word dukkha. So this unsatisfactory, I find a very unsatisfactory translation. Because sure, obviously we don't like that things change a lot of the time. So it depends on what change. But if we hold this generally, say that one characteristic of life is that it's unsatisfactory, what does that really tell about our take on life and what we should do with it? So like, if anything that's changing is unsatisfactory by definition, kind of fatalistic. And and these days that we're teaching here with Martine at Gaia House, I gave some kind of ridiculous examples. It's a little bit, imagine that you buy a flower and then you go back to the flower shop complaining because it withered. And it's like, I'm returning it to you because, it's the flower is wilted, it's not beautiful anymore. I want my money back. Or if a waiter asked you, how was the food in your restaurant? You would say, well, it tasted nice, but then it changed. It was transient, so I didn't find it very satisfactory. You're just getting 1 star on Yelp. That would not make a lot of sense. So impermanence is often explained with this idea that good things end, whether that's like a nice chocolate ends or the weather, nice weather changes into bad weather. Because this is what we resist. We don't resist when a toothache goes away. We embrace that change very happily. But still, to me, this idea of unsatisfactoriness as a mark of our experience or even of existence, as it's usually said, relies on a mindset that values permanence and devalues what is transient. And we see this even in the story of the Buddha that sets out in his noble quest to find what does not age and decay, what does not change. So we can think, to me, a secular Dharma is one that takes these questions and ponders them deeply. How do I understand that? Where do I agree or disagree? What interpretation do I give to this and what effect it has in my practice? It's part of what we will want you to reflect on and debate and ask about. So it's a very natural inclination to be dissatisfied with what's unreliable and changing, of course. But what do we do with it? I feel that an emphasis on this, to me, encourages some world denial and that search for that something that will not pass, something that's reliable, something which can never fail us. But what would that be? In a sense, that is a quest to find something which is not of this world. Because things of this world are changing and unreliable. They're imperfect, they're just the way that they are. So a secular Dharma to me is one that fully embraces these worlds, really embrace to the last consequences. Sounds a little heroic, I know, but fully embrace change and unreliability, which doesn't mean that you love it all the time. It's a deeper understanding that this is the state of things. So again, it's understandable to seek refuge from this existential condition that seems to not offer anything solid. Ultimately, we seek refuge metaphorically from the inclemency of the weather also being, to me, a symbol of this change and the unpredictable nature of nature. You know, where I live in the north of Thailand, and as you know, we had an earthquake some weeks ago, and that is a reminder of these kind of things. The fact that we're at the mercy of natural conditions, it's as if saying that our existential condition is one of being kind of in the outdoors, exposed to the elements. We are exposed. I pity the English language for not having a perfect translation of the Spanish term intemperie. Intemperie, I'm going to write this down because a lot of you might speak Spanish. Um, Intemperie is a term that refers to that exposed condition. When you sleep exposed to the elements, you sleep in the outdoors because you don't have a roof. Um, but it ends up having this almost psychological sense of being unprotected. And here I like, there's a Catalan philosopher that has this quote, which I hope you can see. Can you see this? Okay, it says, "We are out in the open. The most fundamental human situation is to be exposed, to be unprotected. If there were not this basic exposure, the gesture of caring for and protecting would make no sense. But it makes perfect sense. It makes the most sense of everything that makes sense." I really like this quote. It boils down to the fact that we're vulnerable. And nowadays, this is my favorite translation of dukkha, vulnerable, because it speaks to the fact of pain and the fact of the possibility of pain. Everything that's changing is vulnerable in the sense that it's subject to circumstances. If it were not subject to circumstances, if it was an isolated thing that cannot be touched and affected by anything else, it would not be changing. Because why would it change? Things change because of they depend on something that changes and then the thing changes. If nothing can touch you, you're just the thing you are forever. So I like this translation, vulnerability. And I think of the three characteristics is what I call the triangle of vulnerability. Because if you really think about it, these three characteristics imply each other in this way. If I'm changing and impermanent, it means I'm vulnerable. I can be affected by conditions. So that's the second dukkha. And this means I'm conditioned. I am not an autonomous and all-powerful self. I depend on conditions, and their change means I change. They affect me. In other words, something is at stake. Shit can happen, and we need each other. Because if I were not vulnerable, if I were this all-powerful self, then would I be a finite mortal being? Probably not. If it were up to me, I would go on forever until I got tired. But we're usually not very friendly with the idea of death. It's a reminder that our existence depends on things outside of ourselves. And this is what another philosopher, who's not a Buddhist, but to me sounds so much like a Buddhist in some senses, explores in a book. And he starts by asking, what is the difference between living things and non-living things? So what's the difference between me, you, a rabbit, and a doorknob? What does it mean that a doorknob is not alive, for example? And his answer is that to be alive means to be engaged in the activity of self-sustenance. To be alive is to be engaged in the activity of self-sustenance. In other words, to be alive, I have to be doing something to continue being alive. We're exchanging gas with the atmosphere, we're taking in food, we're taking out waste, etc. This activity has to continue to happen for us to be called alive. When it ceases, because of whatever reason, we don't call ourselves alive anymore. Now, a doorknob doesn't need to do anything, doesn't need to be engaged in an activity in order to continue being a doorknob. Or this mug right here. So to be mortal means to be dependent on things outside of our control. Because these activities that we do to be alive, they involve external things, or what we call external things. The trees that provide the oxygen, etc., the things that make us safe. And this is, again, our condition, our existential condition. So I will kind of draw this to a close with another quote that gets to perhaps the heart of the matter here of this idea of secular Dharma as a practice of care, together with Josep Maria Schirol's quote about being exposed, and that's why we care for each other. And that is this idea by Martin Hägglund of secular faith. He says, the sense of the ultimate fragility of everything we care about is at the heart of what I call secular faith. To have secular faith is to be devoted to a life that will end, to be dedicated to projects that can fail or break down. I call it secular faith because it is devoted to a form of life that is bounded by time. Bounded by time. Instead of being that quest for something that's not changing, not vulnerable, not fragile, that cannot fail us. This is, I know that things can fail. I know that, in a sense they will. This is a match that we're going to lose. And I'm going to play this match. When a project fails, when a relationship stops, when a loved one dies, we can feel a lot of pain. But would we then say it was never worth to engage in the first place because it ended? So that is secular faith, this devotion to a life bounded by time and defined by vulnerability. So that's my take on the importance of the secular bit in this idea of secular Dharma. So we have time for discussion now of anything of what we've shared or anything that you brought with you to this session. And it might be a question, it might just be a reflection, or you might just be thinking out loud about the ideas that we just presented. And we will have another chance of this later and of course next week. But it's nice to engage in some discussion. I don't want to call it a debate. Some discussion to tease these things out and make this more of an interesting thing, both for us and for you, so that we can make it relevant to your concerns and your ideas. So we really, really want to hear from you.
I'm very much enjoying your presentation. I've longed to hear about secular Buddhism for a long time. But in listening to Bernat, I wonder, it seemed to me that most of your comments were about things happening to us externally. and recognizing the impermanence and the change that's always happening. But I think sometimes it needs to be emphasized that at the same time, we ourselves are eternally changing. So it's kind of like instead of kind of isolating ourselves and saying, looking at the world as a changing thing, we ourselves have to take into account and realize that we are changing and our sense of self is changing. I just thought maybe that could be more emphasized.
Yeah, I mean, as I said in the meditation, our bodies are changing, and the same would go if we continue with our minds. It's not the world as an external thing. It's our existential condition to be finite beings who are changing, who are vulnerable, who need each other. That's the point of care. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think in a way, what we have to think, it's a little like this flow of condition meeting the outer flow of conditions. So the condition within us, in terms of mood, in terms of thought, in terms of sensation, are changing at the same time that outside is also changing. And then in a way, you have two different type of change. You have the change which comes and go, and then you have the change which kind of actually is over time. And to me, what is an interesting thing in terms of our practice of daily life is to, if something is to notice when, for example, a mood change inside ourselves. And then I ask myself, oh, how long is this going to last? And then if it goes quickly, I think, oh, I don't need to do anything about it. If it continues, then I really need to creatively engage with it. Eva.
So I'm going to back up actually, because part of what attracted me to attend this is I just feel like Buddhism is so fundamentally secular, and I would call it non-theistic. So I don't know if that resonates for you. I'd like to hear. But when I look at Dharma teachings, if you kind of peel away the cosmology and the fanciful stuff, I'm not sure if that's legitimate for me to do that, then actually it is completely secular. And by that, I mean relevant to everybody and how they live their lives, and not incompatible with any other, kind of, our religion is basically the cultural overlay as far as I could see. Anyway, I'd just love to hear what you would respond to that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I wonder if we should hear everybody and then we will respond. Shirley.
Hello, Martine. Many years. I've been dwelling on these concepts with our Sangha, and one of the things that I have found so profound is the teaching of the Buddha of being able to face and go through whatever our suffering offers and not be resistant to it, but vulnerable, open to it, to understand it, to see it clearly with discernment. And one of the images that has come to mind, and I'm sure that you have seen it too, is if we imagine a rolling stream, a roaring stream, and we see a rock in the middle of that stream that remains resilient, that everything is cutting away at the rock, all the power of the water, and to recognize that through our suffering, we eventually investigate it, begin to understand it, see it clearly, so that we can be like that rock and find a place in the flow and in the suffering where we can stand and be the caring individual and the nobility of character that we are suggested, what is suggested that we cultivate in our lifetime. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley. Victoria?
Thank you. I apologize because I've had some disruption for this first hour. So please forgive me if my question is not appropriate. But I would like to hear more about timelessness. So in other words, looking at I come out of the Christian tradition, but with a mystical emphasis on mysticism and the apophatic tradition. So it's an outlook of that time itself is a construct that we have in our temporal existence, but that actually in the ultimate reality is there is no time. And so in looking at the three characteristics, it's hard for me to articulate, but I would love to hear more about how there can be a way of looking at impermanence in an ultimate sense, that actually our perception of permanence or impermanence is in itself not complete or not. I'm sorry, I'm not articulating this very well, but I hope you understand what I mean.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks so much for your teaching. So this is just really, really interesting, and it's great to see you both. And I was just kind of wondering, in a general way, if you could speak to the point about how we co-create experience. You know, that there's this highly unstable system. There are these two flows, internal and external, meeting each other, and the idea that the mind, you know, we have the brain in our head, inside our skull, but the mind is this thing in between two people. It's a co-creation of what's happening. Whether you could, I'm not sure if that's I've articulated that very well, but if you could maybe speak to that a little bit, would be really nice.
Okay, so we have different things. I mean, the easiest thing to say is, of course, I would say Buddhism and secular Buddhism is definitely non-theistic. And of course, very secular, because at one level, it's very practical. The Buddha is always telling us, check it for yourself here and now. So really, it's kind of being here. In terms of the timelessness, actually, one of the quote, I know this is on the sideline of that, but I think one of the wonderful quote I heard is that patience is out of measured time. So being patient in a way is having all the time in the world. And I think this is a wonderful quality in practice nowadays. And then I would say, of course, in terms of co-creation, we are constantly co-created because in a way, we kind of so immersed in the world, which impact us, we've impacted. And I think we have to be careful to think it's only in the mind. I think also the way we are with each other, the way we impact physically or in terms of the mood or emotionally, I find very interesting to also how one listen. I find a very interesting co-creation, how we listen, really allowing very much a creative co-production. Bernat.
Okay, yeah, a lot was said. I took a few notes to see if I can remember some of this. I mean, these are my perspectives, and to me, the point of sharing my perspectives is that you take them in and think about them and either agree or disagree, to some extent, to the full extent, whatever. I would question to what degree Buddhism is non-theistic. I mean, it doesn't have a creator God in the same way, but I mentioned the Buddha's idea of the noble quest. The Buddha is, why I'm subject to aging and decay and death, Do I seek what is also aging and decaying and subject to death? Why don't I seek what is not changing and decaying and death? And that's not very far from some of the conceptions of God. God is what is not this world. God is that which is not changing, it's not imperfect, it cannot fail us. And so it's a similar idea. So I can't say it's exactly the same, but there is that a sort of a religious tendency in seeking that. And I don't say this in any sense pejoratively. I think we all have some of that impulse in us. And yeah, so in that sense, there's a little bit of theism there, but it's different. And to me, the idea of secular Buddhism has less to do with stripping away the culture, which depends on the time we have. We might talk about this maybe next week. But it's always with a culture. I don't think there is a Buddhism before a culture overlay or underneath a cultural overlay. Buddhism is a fruit of culture, always from day one. How could it not be? It's dependently arisen. It comes upon conditions of time and place. But yeah, I think maybe that for next week, some of this. So in terms of stripping away the cosmology, personally, I think we have all the right, all the permission to interpret these things the way we want to, psychologically, metaphorically, as long as we do so with knowledge and respect, as we have the permission to put them aside. It's like, it's not what I find most useful. But that isn't what makes it a religious kind of Buddhism for me. But it's rather, are we aspiring to somehow something other than this changing imperfect world, to escape it, or are we aspiring to engage it and embrace it? And in that sense, Buddhism throughout history has had what we could call religious and secular aspects to it, like probably all philosophical and religious traditions. And for our times, I think it's quite appropriate to emphasize really the embrace of the world, this embrace which is an act of care. And then the last point before maybe Martine wants to add something, or someone else wants to then share reflection, the question of timelessness. Again, this is one perspective, Victoria, for you to arrive at your own, which is really the point. So my perspective would be that we have all sorts of experience which depend in part on the brain, not totally. And we have, most of our experiences are in a modality of time. But we can have experiences that generally we call mystical, that are in a different modality, a modality where we don't have the sensation of time. My personal take is to resist the tendency to then transform this timelessness in what is ultimate truth, really true, but also personally to resist the tendency to somehow devalue this experience, saying, oh, it's just, something that the mind does, but the real thing is with time. Is no, there's two modalities here. We can have experiences in the time mode and in the timeless mode. And that's it. And that's the emptiness of it. None of it is ultimate realities. It's dependent. It's dependent.
The imperfect world is only exists because in some ways for me, I'm still infantile and I want it to be the way I want it to be. And so part of talking about that is, what if nothing changed and I didn't have to grasp onto anything? And I mean, it seems like, gee, that would really be intolerable, if there was never any weather, if there was a constancy and sameness, as much as I think I might like that, that would take care of the anxiety about uncertainty, which is sort of rampant at the moment in the world, but in the United States. So the world is perfectly the way it is because that's the way it is, right? And so then that's I'm a little surprised I'm saying that because I struggle with the way the world is, not the way I want it to be. But how else could it be? And then this is the second course recently that I've been in, and maybe some of the other people here too. Well, when we go over suffering, we go over pain. So you talked about pain, and I could be wrong, but from the very beginning, I thought the Dharma and the practice is about suffering, of which we do play a role in that. So it's about the second arrow. So I don't know if we have some responsibility, but we have some agency. That's why I'm doing the practice. We have some agency. I assume that you know, clearly you know way more than I do. So I wonder why lately are people moving away from the idea that of the second arrow, and that's really isn't that what the practice is headed towards? It isn't to change the conditions of the world. It's to be more fluid in a fluid world.
I think it's actually, if I may say so, I would say it's both in a way. It seems to me that yes, I mean, the Buddha said, life is conditioned, life is impermanent, conditioned, and so there is suffering in life. And in a way, his question was, it was not so much suffering. I mean, the Four Noble Truths are stated that way. But personally, I feel the Buddha is more into what is it that causes harm and what is it that does not cause harm to ourselves and to others. And so, yeah, we need to be aware of pain, of suffering, in order to understand how it arises, how it continues, how it disappears. And then, of course, you have the two aspects. One aspect that things happen to us, and then, of course, how we react to them. You have the double arrow. But at the same time, I don't think it's just about the double arrow, though I think Shirley was kind of pointing out that, the rock in the water, and how can we care for the tumultuousness. But it seems to me there is a bit which is about, yes, recognizing the double arrow, not giving rise to that. And at the same time, a certain creative engagement with certain circumstances where it's not just about how we behave, but that we need to do something about it. So I would say there is both. Bernat, you want to say something, or we ask Shirley and Mark?
I would like to respond rather quickly to Jerry, but not so much because some of this, in a way, we're going into the second part of today, as Martine was anticipating already. And so if I can open the box of the rabbit, sorry, I'm thinking in Spanish. I don't see nirvana or awakening as freedom from suffering. I see it as freedom from harming. It's an ethical thing. So we'll talk about this in the second half. And the other thing very quickly, as you observe, change is what allows bad news and good news. So how could it be otherwise? Changelessness, absolute changelessness is uninhabitable. It's everything and nothing.
And then Mark?
I would say that I really like the emphasis in secular Buddhism. I heard this from Stephen Batchelor as well. The emphasis on care. But so I've always regarded the Buddha as a physician, as somebody who's taking care and emphasized care and care for the suffering in the world. And so what is new then well, I'm not sure whether secular Buddhism is new, but at least historically, I think it is some new stage or some new development. But why is that different from what the Buddha, I think, really was about?
I don't think we're saying that actually what we say is new. Actually, we're saying more that it corresponds to what the Buddha said. Definitely. And I think it's also, which we have not talked about and we might talk about next time, which is in a way karma and reincarnation. And how, in a way, I mean, I have been in some country, and once I was at a conference when a Korean nun was admonishing the public to not use the idea of karma, to not care for people who were deaf. And then she had kind of a choir with deaf language by hand language. And I thought very interesting, because you can use karma in that way. Oh, it's your fault. I'm not going to help you. So I think it's, again, how have certain idea lead to more care or less care, and that we might look more at it next time.
I would say, Mark, that it's impossible to know what Buddhism was about. And attempts to do that are attempts to think for oneself, but put it, as the Argentinian writer Jorge Luis Borges put it, everything one writes is autobiographical. But there's two ways of doing that. One can say, I was born in Buenos Aires in 18 whatever, or one can say, in a land very, very far away, etc., etc. So all we can do is try to understand our best how it makes sense to us. So maybe some of the things we say are new, maybe not. Maybe it's the same, but it's a different language, which looks different, but it's impossible to know in the end whether it's a different language completely or a different content. The line is really blurry.
Shirley, or is there somebody else? Shirley, then.
I just feel that this secular Buddhism, and it's a feeling, it's a universal feeling, because there's so much goodwill out there that we can connect with. But I think the Buddhist teachings are about self-care so that we can be a benefit to others. And the way that he teaches is all about taking what we have been born with and using that to cope with whatever circumstances and conditions arise in our lives. Now, I'm 93, so that's kind of where my perspective is.
Thank you, Shirley. You know, what is interesting is that, in a way, we say secular Dharma, but in Taiwan, very early in the 20s, 30s, actually, there was a few monks and nuns, and they promoted what they call humanistic Buddhism. And what was characteristic about what they call humanistic Buddhism is that they actually went into the world to help people in very practical way. So again, I think maybe why did they do this? Possibly because the monks and the nuns have stopped doing it, even they might have done it before. So I think in a way, secular Buddhism in comparison to maybe something just a little before, not necessarily all the way back to 2,500 years. Bernat, you want to have the last word?
Sometimes I do. It's one of the pleasures of life. Joke aside, thank you, Shirley, for that. I have nothing to add to that. I did, though, remember part of what Mark said about the Buddha being a physician, and that's been the norm, at least in Southeast Asia. Monks were doctors, and they stopped that with the arrival of modern medicine in places like Sri Lanka, Burma, or Thailand. It was always connected to whatever was the medical science of the moment, be that Ayurveda or whatever. So in some sense, the mindfulness movement being in hospitals is nothing new at all.
So thank you very much for now, because we thought you might need a little break. So we thought a break of 20 minutes. So welcome back. It's nice to see you again, the one I can see on the screen. I am on an iPad, so I only see a certain amount, about 12. So thank you. And so what we want to do in the second part of this session is actually look at awakening, enlightenment, Buddhahood, in a way, you could say from a secular point of view, for in a way, point of view of now, the saeculum. And to me, again, what I found interesting about the place where we find ourselves in terms of encountering Buddhist idea, Buddhist history, and Buddhist philosophy, is that actually we can see the history. We can see, in a way, from 2,500 years ago, and then you have certain transformation in certain country, then you have different tradition evolving, and in a way nowadays in our century, then we encounter these different elements, and then we can see that actually up to a point you have slightly different idea about awakening, about Buddhahood, about enlightenment. And this is something I have pondered about, because in a way, the first idea of Buddhahood, which appeared in a way after the Buddha died, but maybe during his time also, that in a way, in order to become a Buddha, he had to have many lifetime of practice. And then there was one important condition for his last life to become the fully realized Buddha. And that's what he had to be born in a male body. And me, I have a little trouble with gendered awakening, let's say. So I'm a little kind of like, what does that mean? Does that mean the ladies have to wait in the back? And as my teacher used to tell me, and I used to totally disagree with him, he used to say, oh, pray to be reborn as a man, and then you'll have better chances. And then I would say, oh, do you mean that? A woman cannot be enlightened. He said, no, I don't mean this, but. So in a way, we have that first idea of Buddhahood, that basically many lifetimes, and you need a male body. Then over time, then you start to have another idea that in a way Buddhahood, awakening, enlightenment, is possible within one lifetime. So in a way, if one practices hard enough and really devote oneself, then possibly toward the end of this life, then you could experience Buddhahood, awakening, enlightenment. That's something you find more, for example, in the Tibetan tradition, some Tibetan tradition. And then you have a further, in a way, idea. I'm not saying temporally, but in terms of kind of when Buddha would happen. You have the idea from the Son, Zen Chan tradition, that actually you already awakened. So before many lifetimes, then you have one lifetime, and now you're already awakened. And in a way, the only thing you need to do is to see it, is to know it. And I met long ago in Korea this wonderful nun, and I asked her, what's your practice? And she said, my practice is to be a Buddha. And so in the morning, she would do her chanting, her meditation, and then she was a teacher at a university. And then she would leave the temple with the intention to be a Buddha today. So really like saeculum, totally saeculum. Today, I'm going to be a Buddha. And then she would go about her day, then she would come back in the evening. And then she would check how Buddha-like I had been, how un-Buddha-like I had been, and then she would start again. And what would she do this? Because there is this saying in the Song tradition, kind of, a Buddha is a sentient being is a Buddha. And so in a way, it's kind of like how much Buddha-like, how much sentient being-like. And then there is this, what I would say, this interesting idea to me, which I met when I was at my temple, because my temple was in Korea, in the southwest, near Gwangju, Songwangsan. And they were following the teaching of Master Bojo, Master Chinul, who followed also the teaching of Master Tsungmi in China in the 10th, 11th century. And one of the idea they had about awakening was that in a way you had sudden awakening followed by gradual practice. When actually most of the time in the Song tradition, what's the best deal is sudden awakening and sudden practice, which never totally made sense to me, I must say. So I was so happy to be actually in this temple who believed, their basis was sudden awakening followed by gradual practice. What did it mean? Is actually looking at sudden awakening as in a way something which can happen at any moment. So in a way, since you're already a Buddha in that tradition, then in a way it can happen at any moment. And then in a way what happens is generally in terms of possibly for our experience, is that suddenly to me, this is about, in a way from a secular perspective, a moment of deep grasping. Because I think often sometimes the problem I feel with enlightenment, with Buddhahood, with awakening, is that we feel it's going to be kind of something which is going to transcend everything. Often I have an image that you suddenly kind of start to rise above the ground, and then you become a Christmas tree at the same time. But personally, I doubt this is what happened. And maybe it is more what we experience when we meditate, but also in daily life, that we have these moments where actually we experiencing, manifesting what we would call the factors of awakening: mindfulness, quietness, evenness, care. And so it's a moment when, in a way, the selfish self dissolves, and then we experience the connection, and we see others as much as we see ourselves, because I think this is one of the important conditions for a wise compassion, the fact that we see others as much as ourselves. And so in a way, there is this idea that you have this sudden moment where you see things clearly, or there is this love, or whatever it might be, where the self, in a way, this selfish, this grasping, just disappear for a moment, for a few hours, for a day or two. And then it comes back. But why does it come back? In a way, it comes back because of the power of the habits. And I think that's when we practice the Dharma, that it be secular Dharma or not. I think in a way, as we practice with the three training, ethics, meditation, wisdom, what we recognize is that we are caught in repetitive patterns. And so that's what I was talking about in terms of the anchoring, the focusing, that it helps us to go back to the creative functioning, and we dissolve the patterns. And if we dissolve the patterns, then in a way, there is so much more space, there is so much less repetition, and then there can be much more clarity, much more insight. But in a way, the power of the habits are quite strong. I mean, we know for ourselves, as we sit in meditation, planning, ruminating, or if we are in daily life. I personally very interested in patience in daily life. You know, I mean, I am a teacher. I have meditated hours. I mean, I was in a scientific study because I had done my 10,000 hours of meditation. But sometimes my patience can be like timeless. I have all the time in the world. And sometimes my patience is a millisecond. And this is so interesting. You know, why at times I can have this endless patience, and at other time I'm like, kind of, there is this kind of like, there is no patience at all. And I think, again, this is back to what Bernat was talking about, the conditionality. I think the gradual practice is very much looking at, in a way, that's what we studied during the week. We were teaching this week at Gaia House, and we're teaching the contemplation of the Dharma, of the Satipatthana, and really looking at process, the absence of something, the presence of something. How can something not arise? How can something will arise? What are the conditions for that? And it seems to me that in a way, there is this two things in tandem. There is this sudden moment where in a way the grasping can go, and there is other moment where actually the condition, inner, outer, will make that we kind of suddenly we tense, suddenly we kind of, we self in a way. And I think this is so hard. And I think one of the conditions which really make us self is uncertainty and fear. And I would say at the moment, there is so much uncertainty and so much fear. And in a way, how can secular Dharma or Dharma of any kind, how can it help us to creatively engage with the uncertainty, with the fear, so that the care can be there? Because I think this is something I notice with the impatient. If I am impatient, I'm actually not compassionate. I'm actually not very caring and careful. I really notice that. Same when you are busy. You are busy, I am busy, I'm busy. It's like, oops, kind of awakening is very far away then. Selfing is in full action. So I think it's kind of interesting to look, in a way, when we practice, in terms of when have I experienced? And that's what the awakening factors is about in the contemplation of Dharma, is knowing that I can experience this mindfulness, the energy, the investigation, the quietness, etc., the samadhi. And at the same time, with certain condition, I will be caught. And then how can I creatively engage with that? And so in a way, I find for secular Dharma, that idea of sudden awakening followed by gradual practice, again, sudden awakening, again, followed by gradual practice. I find that a very interesting framework to kind of, in a way, kind of ground the practice on. So that's what I wanted to share. Now to Bernat.
Okay. So awakening, kind of an important topic, I think, in Buddhism. Sometimes I think if someone asked me, what is Buddhism, and I had to reply in a very concise way, one way would be that it's a reflection on impermanence, as we were talking before the break. And the second way I might think about it, it's also a reflection, an extended reflection across time about what awakening means. And it has been changing, and as Martine pointed out, there's different conceptions of it according to culture and time. So since secular Buddhism is usually associated with going back to the early texts, I thought we could go back to the Buddha's story. But when I say to the Buddha's story, I do not mean history. I'm going to be using the story of the Buddha, regardless of historical arguments about it. As you probably know, the Buddha is said to have lived in great luxury in a palace, and then he's dissatisfied with that, and he has an awakening moment in a way, when he really realizes that everything is finite, everything is transient, impermanent. We all grow old and get sick and die. So he wakes up to his existential condition, as we were saying earlier. He wakes up to the fact that in some metaphorical sense, we live exposed to the elements of nature. We cannot escape this. And then he literally leaves the palace and goes live out in the open, exposed to the elements. So in that moment, you could say that he has already seen the truth of impermanence and dukkha, pain, or however we translate that. So you could think, well, then that cannot really be the big awakening discovery, because he already knows that when he sets out on his path. In fact, that's what sets him out on his path. The realization of impermanence and suffering, human pain, human vulnerability. And he's looking for something else, for something that's not changing, that's not vulnerable, that is not gonna disappoint us. And he has some Brahmanic teachers, and he learns that, but then moves on to some other teacher, and then moves on. And he spends some years practicing very harsh austerity. It's a very painful type of practice. Until, again, he thinks that maybe that is not going anywhere, to just harm himself in this way. And the village girl, Sujata, offers him a bowl of rice porridge. And then after eating that, he thinks, well, maybe I do not need to fear this sort of pleasure of just nourishing myself if it has nothing to do with reactive patterns. So maybe now I'm experiencing some well-being that's not about the fleeting superficial circumstances of my luxurious palace life, but he has this meditative experience of bliss, of happiness, of joy that is not related to reactivity. And that's a big breakthrough. And then he reaches his awakening. And then he hesitates whether to teach or not to teach. That is the question. And he's inclining to not teaching, thinking that's going to be quite annoying. And it's going to be really exhausting. People don't want to hear these things. People are happy with their comfort zones. They don't want anyone coming and shaking up their apparent certainties. So it's going to be really tiring for me to try to make them understand. And then he receives the visit of this deity who says, please teach. Some people will understand. There are beings with little dust in their eyes who will understand the Dharma. And then he decides to teach. Now, why is this interesting? Why is this interesting? I think it's interesting because after he wakes up and he decides to teach, so part of what he's doing is helping the world, helping others. He teaches the Dharma, so that's one way of helping, but he also sometimes tries to mediate between rulers and the villagers if there's some conflict. So he tries to promote well-being. He expresses his care. He's helping the world. And my question is, this is not what he had set out to find when he left the palace. He was looking for that which is beyond change, aging, sickness, and death. So how did he end up there? What's the turning point? Is the turning point that experience of non-reactive well-being, of jhana? Well, that's one reading. I think what makes the difference is Sujata, the village girl who offers the Buddha some rice porridge. So you probably know this. Sujata offers this to the Buddha. It's an act of care. And that's what leads the Buddha to wonder about well-being. And then there goes the jhanas, and then later there's awakening. The beginning of the turning point of the journey is the kindness of this girl. So it's as if through an act of kindness, of compassion from someone else that he receives, he realizes that the path of hardships doesn't make sense. In that path, he's harming himself, quite literally. It's a type of practice where one subjects the body to very extreme conditions. And later in his teaching career, the Buddha will criticize and even sometimes mock that type of practice by saying this is useless. You're just creating pain for yourself for no reason. And those ascetics say, no, with all this pain, we are burning the past karma, the past sins, if we want to use this Christian language. And the Buddha cheekily asks, when does this pain increase? Is it while you're doing the practice? Then does this pain come from burning past karma, or does it come from the way you're practicing? You're inflicting this pain on yourself. And through that act of kindness from Sujata, the Buddha thinks the way is not to cause harm. Of course, he never thought that the path is about let's harm others. But I think maybe it's some sort of shift that well-being and caring is the path. Because the well-being of jhana or other type of state, the type of well-being that the Buddha will later promote is a well-being that's non-self-centered. It's a well-being of generosity, of kindness, of being mindful and caring to others, to learn to enjoy that. So that it's basically a win-win situation. You derive your happiness from helping others. Because you need some happiness and they need happiness. So we're all contributing to each other's well-being. So in some sense, I think when he hesitates whether to stay in the bliss of those states or go out and teach, he's having that little crisis of faith, and then that deity, what he does is to remind the Buddha of that act of kindness. So like, please help others. And maybe then there was a connection. And I say maybe because I'm imagining this. So it's like, I was helped. And that's why this has happened. And so I will help. For a while now, I've been thinking about nirvana, not in terms of freedom from suffering, but freedom from harming. And it seems just like changing a word, but I think it has quite big implications, and it has shifted my practice, and I think it will continue to do so. If I aim for freedom from suffering, I'm assuming that that end is possible, of every suffering. Yes, the second arrow, but there's still other forms of suffering. And so that depends on what worldview we hold, then that will have one meaning or another. That doesn't mean the same thing if we think of life in terms of reincarnation, or if we think that there's only one life. It makes a difference. I think suffering is there to be embraced because it's a part of life. And I don't think I can stop all of it. But I observe that very often I create suffering for myself and for others. And that's the bit that's interesting. I create that suffering. I harm myself and others. Not because I want to, not because I'm evil, but because I suffer myself and I don't know how to handle it, and I'm a bit clumsy and things happen and life isn't easy. But still, I don't want to hurt others, but I do. And I don't want to create suffering for myself, but I do. So the question is, okay, how does this happen? How do I do this? How am I creating suffering? How am I increasing tensions? If I know how to, then I will know how can I stop. This reminds me of another story you may know. This serial killer, Angulimala, is chasing the Buddha to kill him. And the Buddha performs a miracle, some feat like power, psychic powers, where the Buddha appears to be walking very slowly, but it doesn't matter how quickly Angulimala runs, he can never catch him, even though the Buddha is walking very slowly. The sort of paradox there. And at one point, Angulimala is really frustrated, like, why I can't catch this guy? And so like, why don't you stop? And the Buddha says, I have stopped. Why don't you stop? And maybe, again, we can interpret that as the Buddha has stopped inflicting suffering. So the Buddha is the idea that we can understand how we're creating suffering, and then we can undo this. For some, this might be a little bit of a mundane quest. To me, I think that if you take it to the kind of ultimate consequence, it's a huge deal. It's a huge deal. So these are my thoughts about awakening. And what we want to do now is to make you reflect on your ideas about awakening. Now, we suggest making breakout rooms, so Rob is preparing these, but do not feel obliged to join them. So some people may prefer to reflect on this individually. So again, you will have 20 minutes, 20 minutes. And I would really encourage you to take some time, even pen and paper, if that's what helps you think about how do you see the goal of the practice at this time? What is awakening, or what could it be? Because it's important. If this is where you want to go, you have to make sure that your boat is facing that way. It has to match. It's not that there's a right or a wrong understanding of nirvana. It's that whatever is your North Star, you have to think about it, refine that understanding, and then make sure that you're facing that direction. And so also be brave to discover that maybe some things are not facing where I want to go. Or maybe I had not thought about this for some time. And now that I think about it, my goal is a little bit different than it was a few years ago. And challenge if then that means you should change something of your practice so it matches your understanding of where you want to go, what awakening is for you. And then we'll meet back here. So whether you go into the group or reflect individually, to then reflect together and share ideas and questions that arise in this exercise. Martine, is there anything that you want to say to that? Okay, so it's going to be 20 minutes starting now. And in the first couple of minutes, maybe we will move someone around. If there's a room that's just only one person alone, then we will move them somewhere else. So see you in 20 minutes.
Hello, nice to see you coming back. So, is everybody back? Yes, it looks like it. Good, good, good. I hope you had a very nice discussion for those who had discussion, or an interesting self-reflection for those who decided to do self-reflection. And so now we have 20 minutes of discussion Have you got any question or comments, question about what we said, comments, or anything you want to share from your discussion? So somebody's raised their hand with a telephone.
Good morning. This is Michael on the telephone. And I just wanted to show my appreciation for you putting us in the small groups, because I find that I hear a lot of wisdom and it helps me reflect. And I find it's probably the most beautiful part of the practice. And sometimes Sati Center does, sometimes they don't. It's uncertain. And I'm just very grateful and appreciative, and deep bows for your kind attention and beautiful talks and facilitation this morning.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So I'm glad, because we know some people really benefit from the small groups, and some people are little kind of feel differently about it. And I think it's good to make it flexible. So those who benefit do it, and those not don't do it. So I'm glad it was beneficial. Anything else?
We'd really like to hear your ideas about awakening. And you don't necessarily need to summarize. I mean, 20 minutes is a lot, but maybe in that discussion, something arose that now you can think of, oh, so Miranda.
Thank you, Bernat. Firstly, let me say what a comfort it is to see both of you. I almost always am thrilled with the little breakout groups whenever they're offered, but I stayed by myself and wrote because I'm at a very difficult crossroads in my life, which, lucky for you, I won't go into. But the two things are in the discussion of whether or not Buddhism is theistic. The thing that has always drawn me in is the lack of something being supernatural. There's plenty of Buddhist stories where there's all kinds of supernatural stuff, but it tends to be laid over the top and is not necessary for what I take from the stories and the teachings. The fact that it is transcendent in a personal way rather than transcendent in a religious way. And the thing that struck me today that I found so helpful in the little letter that I wrote to myself here was the idea of ordinary pleasure in the porridge, that the ways in which I hurt myself have to do with seeking joy and overshooting the mark. And the idea of just a bowl of porridge was so helpful and lovely. So thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Yes, I think in a way, what personally I found interesting in terms of text, in terms of religion, with Buddhism is that in a way, I find it's kind of like, what is it that speaks to us? What is it that we can cultivate? And especially at any moment in our life, because in a way, at different time, we are in different places, different texts will speak to us differently. And it seems to me that's something about text, actually, which I found interesting about Buddhism, because I've done some translation, is that in a way, 1/3 is actually still relevant to us now. That's what I found, that something said 2,500 years ago, it's so practical, it's so about life, it's so about experience, that it speaks to me now and I can apply it. Then there is a third, which is really so cultural in terms of the reference point are so different than my reference point. There is a different perspective. And I totally honor that perspective because that's what they know and how they knew then. And for me, it's very hard up to a point not to have, like, for example, a scientific perspective, because that's what, in a way, I have been raised with. And then there is one third, which is about competition with other religion, other school. And generally I think, well, that's what they competed at the time. I don't need to bother with those, because that was kind of what was happening for them then. And so I think, yes, I think each of us will take what is beautiful at the moment. And then the porridge, I'm glad the porridge. I think Bernat has got some really interesting idea about this kind of meeting of the young girl and the porridge and the Buddha. I think there is really something there. So now we have Patty.
Well, I just thought it was a really lovely question about what does it mean about awakening, nibbana, or to put it in other terms, like why am I here today? Why did I choose to spend my 3 hours this way today, and lots of other hours? And I don't think I really know. I think, like, I'm looking out my window at some mountains in the distance, and you know, Bernat was talking about you know, it really helps if you're going to reach your goal to be pointed in the right direction. So supposing I want to walk to those mountains, I don't really know what it'll be like when I'm up on the mountain. I don't know what that perspective will be, but what I can do is to just, you know, it would take several days to get there. And so you could think in terms of like rebirth if you wanted to, or whatever. But all I can really do is enjoy my journey and enjoy where I am today. And to me, that is as close as I can get to living the goal, the goals of the practice. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
Thank you.
Pat.
It makes.
And that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah. The goal, see, we never know what it is. And sometimes we have a specific language for it. Some time ago, I thought about this freedom from harming. It inspires me to walk in a particular direction. Maybe it stops working in a few years and I have to change it. There's a period in the middle where it's a bit unclear, but the point is more the direction than the destination we reach. So totally on board with this. It's the journey, it's the walking. Yeah.
And Victoria?
Thank you. I see that Shirley has her hand up too. I just didn't know what the sequence was, but did you see that?
You can go, and then Shirley will still be there.
Thank you. This is, I had a question earlier, so I didn't want to take up more time than I should. I still, as you recall, I was asking about timelessness and the interface between secular Buddhism and like to me, the idea of reincarnation and apropos of this time versus timelessness is, again, and I think in other religions too, even if they don't espouse reincarnation, if they have the idea of heaven or an afterlife, there's there becomes this a kind of conflict almost, or it could be a conflict between living in the moment and mindfulness, which is what is so prevalent in contemporary secular Buddhism. I thought it was really fascinating that you said, Martine, that when you were studying, that wasn't a discourse, it wasn't as prevalent as a focus. But I find this, there can be almost a kind of duality between the sense of living in this moment. How can I, and when you talked about patience, I totally relate to that. and then the idea of reincarnation and how the karma, one's karma then will lead to the ultimate, the next reincarnation. That dance between something in the future and being in the moment now, and how we live out our karma in the moment. And even with nibbana, the sense, I love the idea of non-harm, of like claiming the possibility of nibbana moment to moment, rather than this thing of, maybe in a 1,000 lifetimes I will be enlightened enough that I can achieve nibbana. But looking at more, I really love looking at it in the sense of the cooling off of the kleshas, or the afflictions. Because then it is like, apropos of patience, it's a moment by moment, we're on this path, and every moment we're trying to, do better for the sake of non-harming. But if you could comment on that a little bit, because for me, the reincarnation tends to keep popping up, and I don't know where to put it in my own study of Buddhism.
I think, you see, you have two sutta I would recommend, the Kalama Sutta, but also the Tita Sutta. The Tita Sutta is very interesting. It's in the Anguttara Nikaya, in the number 61. But the Kalama Sutta, what I love about it, not so much the beginning, everybody knows about, don't depend on this, on that, on that. But what is interesting is the Buddha said what is important is not the truth of the statement that the teacher says, but if you apply it, are you going to be less harmful, or are you going to be more harmful? But then, to me, the Kalama Sutta is kind of like a piece of music in 4 movements. And the third movement is about, if you believe in reincarnation, then if you do good, if you are harmless, you're going to have a good next life. If you don't believe in reincarnation, you will have a good life anyway, because you're not harming anybody. So I really like this, we kind of, the Buddha saying, well, you believe in it, still helpful. You don't believe in it, still helpful. Because the point is actually more the not harming than what will happen or not, because we're not sure about that. But in the Tita Sutta, it's kind of like the wrong view of others. And then the first one is that everything we experience is because of the past karma. And the Buddha said, no, because if everything is due to past karma, then you cannot change anything now, because it's all due to past karma. Then he said, if it's because of God, then, you have no kind of, action on God. So, again, you can't do much about this. And then you have the people who say, well, there is no cause and effect. And again, he said, well, you can't change anything with that. And in a way, what interests a Buddha is, what kind of action can we have now so that we don't create harm now? So personally, I think in a way, in a culture which believes in reincarnation, I'm not going to tell them I don't believe in it. Because, they believe in it, why not? That's the way that they believe in it, like I believe in scientific stuff, which I can't prove myself. But people have told me it's true. Okay. It's about the same a little bit. But in a way, for myself, it's, what can I do now? And then we'll see later what happened or not. But we might talk more, about this next week.
Thank you. I will read those suttas in the meantime. Thank you so much. Beautiful answer.
Shirley?
I just want to ask you to comment on insight, Vipassana insight process, and enlightenment. How do you see them the same, and how do you see them differently?
So both of us can answer. So me, I would say insight, it's kind of a momentary, suddenly we see something we've not seen before. Even if it was in front of our eyes, we suddenly see it when we have not been able to see it clearly before. when I think awakening, enlightenment, I would see as a definition in the sutta about the unconditioned. What is the unconditioned? It is being unconditioned by greed, hatred, and ignorance. So I think in one insight, I don't think we can really dissolve greed, hatred, and delusion. But it can diminish, of course, greed, hatred, and delusion. But it seems to me my path, my practice is very much how can I diminish greed, hatred, and delusion to such a degree that then there can be more wisdom and compassion. So I would see the awakening, enlightenment are much more encompassing, much more multifaceted, and insight more as a sudden moment, in a way, of insight, that you see something you had not seen before. Bernat.
Thank you. Thank you.
So just to make sure I understand the precise point of the question about the relationship of insight and awakening or insight process, can you reformulate briefly? So, because I want to really understand the point of it.
My question is about, in my practice, well, first of all, I never thought of being an enlightened human being in this life. My life circumstances are such that it just didn't seem necessary. On the other hand, insight was very important into my personal growth and going on the journey. And then when I heard you talking about enlightenment before, I thought to myself, well, what's the difference between a Vipassana moment of insight, which can really transform your life, versus, I guess, the overall
Okay.
that you become enlightened? Yes, okay.
Yeah. So the Buddhist tradition from the beginning has spoken of awakening kind of various levels. So we have the idea of this definitive sort of awakening, is the idea of the 100% destruction of any form of reactivity, greed, hatred, and delusion. Then there's also the acknowledgement that every time we let go of some of this form of reactivity, that is a little nirvana as well. So it's a difference between a fire may go out temporarily, a big fire may be extinguished forever. So there's that awakening that's sort of definitive, another that's not completely definitive, and different teachers and different traditions have thought of this in various ways. So that I particularly like Ajahn Buddhadasa and his idea that it sounds very Mahayana, but it has actually been part even of the Theravada Abhidharma for centuries. It's the baseline of the mind. Nirvana is kind of like the baseline of the mind. We just go out of it very often. But what I like about Buddhadasa is his idea that actually the little moments of nirvana, which is where the mind goes in between each instance of reactivity, where it goes to rest, he said if you do the maths, those actually outnumber the moments of reactivity. He said, like, what we need to do is tap into those moments. So moments of insight, as you describe them, could be understood as moments where we become hyper aware of that absence of reactivity. And this has a profound effect because then we see it is possible. I can be non-reactive and things feel different and things look different and I am different, etc. And yeah, the sort of faith in a way, then it's easier to tap into them more. But nowadays, I even think of degrees of nirvana. I can be a little more awake, or even, I can be more Buddha-like or more Mara-like in every moment.
So I'm really appreciating and really learning a lot and taking a lot of this in. In a personal level, I work in mindfulness and in a nonprofit that I'm training mentors and support providers that deal with individuals with eating disorders. So when we talk about rumination and we talk about habits and we talk about coming back and forth. In fact, I'm creating a module now. The strength and the power of self-compassion, developing self-compassion and meta toward ourselves, so that when we go up to this pattern and we keep coming back and we're practicing, that we give ourselves some grace, that we understand that as we practice and we're aware and insightful of behaviors or habits that are harmful to ourselves or to others, that we have the understanding that it takes time and practice and to come back and understand it, and then it may happen again. And because in recovery, it's a stepping stone, it's a stair, and we fall and we go up maybe 1 or 2 steps and we go back down. But I think that self-compassion and loving kindness for ourselves as we're going through our process is extremely important. So that's it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. No, of course, of course. And in a way, I think whenever there is this kind of patterning, I think what also is very helpful, in a way, it's mindfulness of the feeling tone, to see how, in a way, often if we overeat, is often either it's because you want more food, but I would say a lot of the time it's more because you have an unpleasant tonality, and that's your way to cope with it. And so in a way to understand, it is kind of like a survival mechanism. Could they be another one? But also, as you're saying, one of the interesting things about impermanence is what I would call the gift of change. That maybe I cannot change immediately, but I can have compassion for myself, where at times it has been a little better, then it's a little worse, and it's a little better again. And I think then also the insight in impermanence can be also that kind of softening, kind of knowing it's possible, knowing I have done it before, and knowing it's possible. So yes, very much loving kindness and compassion. And yeah, during the retreat, Bernat did some wonderful kind of talk about that. You could do a course on that next time. It was so beautiful. So maybe he has a few words to say about that.
I'm not sure. I mean, what you both said is very on point. And I'm still thinking of Sujata and that moment where the Buddha allows himself to feel okay. The Buddha allows himself to feel okay. And that's a big shift. That's a big shift. I've been recently, maybe the past year or so, influenced in metta practice by a Thai teacher called Ajahn Mahachachai, who speaks of metta as meeting anything with a soft and gentle mind, softening your contact to any experience. So, you know, the Buddhist concept of contact, like there's a sensory stimuli, and then there's an organ, and then there's an awareness, so they meet, that's called contact. Like any conscious experience you have is a form of contact, of touching the world, touching your experience. It's just like soften those contacts. That's the beginning of metta. And that's one of the beginnings of metta. And I find this very, very helpful. Anytime I feel some tension, some hardening, then reminder, soften. And sometimes that's all it takes. But yeah, I think if I continue talking, I would go over the. But this teacher recommends spending a long time just staying with the first stage of metta for oneself, or just it's not just for oneself, it's just like abiding in metta, just generating, contacting that quality, kind of baking it, and just like dwelling there. And then you start to expand it and open it, and just You live in it. You are metta, and metta is you. So it's like, don't rush over the kinds of like people. Just kind of just cook it. Just be a metta pot, you know. Just like, and then you can open the lid, and people can smell the soup.
So thank you very much. It was so nice to be with you today. And I don't know if Rob has some announcement. Otherwise, we'll meet each other in a week at the same time.